Egon, let's start with understanding the scope of the problem. Not a lot of research. You've done groundbreaking work. How much is this costing all Albertans, whether it's the economy, health, justice, foster care?
Well, first of all, it's worth to remind people of the fact that FASD is caused by alcohol use during pregnancy, nothing else. It is, there is no level of alcohol consumption that is determined safe. Second, it affects about 1 of 100 newborns. So in Canada, there are about 3,500 babies born every year with FASD.
And Alberta no different?
In Alberta, it's no different. There are about 500 born every year. We have, as they said here in the introduction, 23,000 people right now living with FASD in Alberta.
And the financial cost alone,
Right.
let alone the social suffering, huge.
Yes, it is huge. In Alberta, it is at least $520 million per year. And this includes cost of healthcare, which is the majority of the cost, but also cost of educational support, social support, and not the least also cost of correctional services. The people with FASD are overrepresented in jails.
So more than 50%?
No, but they are the
too
biggest
many.
group. Right.
And foster care as well, just an incredible amount of FASD children in foster care. Bruce, the stigma of a woman drinking during pregnancy, does that make it difficult to identify babies that need our help most?
There are multiple things that make it difficult to identify. One is, of course, people not willing to admit to the fact that they were drinking during pregnancy. People who didn't realize they were pregnant, for example.
Right.
Especially sometimes young people at universities who just heard about binge drinking, for example. And as well as, of course, the fact that there are all kinds of issues that impact whether or not someone drinks. So you have to focus sometimes on the community's responsibility to helping people not drink, for example, or treating alcoholism, etc. So simple campaigns that say don't drink while you're pregnant have an impact, but not so much on the population we most need to address.
Right, women living in perhaps abusive households,
abusive
households.
Poverty, for example, right. People with perhaps other challenges in their lives, mental health issues.
Right, and then we all wind up with this heartbreaking problem. Denise, why doesn't the province even, isn't even able to really know how many Albertans truly have FASD? I mean, it's just not that simple.
And it's not that simple, Jennifer. The whole issue around prevalence of FASD is huge. Obviously, there's a lot of research that's happening across Canada, particularly through the Canada Northwest FASD Partnership, as well as in Alberta. For example, Egon's organization, the Institute of Health Economics, is very involved in some research on prevalence, right? It's a very difficult, complex, it's an issue that has a lot of challenges.
Because it can show up as attention deficit, or
there can be a lot of secondary diagnoses, such as anxiety, depression, ADHD, there's all the other issues related to school performance, placement breakdown.
Hard to know how to deal with it if we don't even know how many people have it.
And we're working towards that goal of searching out actually what is the prevalence in Alberta, what's the prevalence in Canada. And so there's large groups of organizations partnering, such as we've partnered with IHE, to work together to see if we can gather that understanding.
Chris, FASD youth in the criminal justice system alone, is their fetal alcohol spectrum disorder discovered too late?
Usually we find that we discover it once they come into the system.
Yeah.
They have a tendency to be easily led when you speak to them. A number of red flags goes off in my mind when I'm speaking to a young person who I think has FASD. They as I said, they're easily led with questions, and when we do identify them, or at least we suspect it, we usually discuss it with the judge, and we order a complete assessment for the FASD.
But the crime's been committed. It's tragic.
Sorry?
The crime's already been committed. It's a little bit backwards and tragic, isn't it?
It is somewhat, but usually when a young person is charged with a crime, a young person with FASD, it's usually a relatively minor crime, but then they tend to accumulate a series of administrative breaches, that sort of thing. That's the first indication we usually get that a young person might have FASD.
And I know that you're taking a lot of steps to try to help them once that is identified. Denise, Alberta Child and Youth Services, along with Alberta Health, Alberta Justice, there's a lot of departments offering supports. But based on Egon's numbers and I guess concern that this thing's actually getting worse, not better, we're not even sure. Does it seem like things are working? Do you feel comfortable that you're winning or not yet?
I think Alberta has really taken on a strong leadership role with FASD, and through a cross-ministry committee, which has 10 partnering ministries as well as 4 agencies, including Alberta Health Services and Safe Communities, First Nations and Inuit Health and public health agencies, have all gathered together to really address the issue of FASD across the lifespan through a 10-year strategic plan. We're in year 5 of that plan, and so we've moved as quickly as we could to develop 12 FASD service networks that are across Alberta, community-led, community-driven, building community capacity to provide assessment and diagnostic services across the lifespan, to look at prevention across the lifespan, as well as supports and services for individuals suspected or impacted with FASD and their caregivers. And so those networks are very, very active in pulling their local communities together to address the problem.
Bruce, is it working?
No, in my opinion, it's not working, particularly for adults. I think Child and Youth Services, we have great legislation, great program. It's inclusive of kids with disabilities, irrespective of their disabilities. When you turn age 18 in our province, essentially it's a patchwork of supports. In fact, 2 years ago, Alberta narrowed the eligibility for supports, which had a particular impact on adults with FASD who may not reach the IQ criteria that was set. So it's one thing that's great. We have a cross-ministry committee. They're not working as effectively as I would like them to by allowing one government department, in effect, to narrow the door to supports and no capacity to actually create it to address all those who now fall outside the door. We're seeing people now in really dangerous situations who can't receive the supports they would have received more than 2 years ago when the eligibility criteria was broader.
We'll let our government person respond, our spokesperson respond in a moment. There are calls for government to cut spending. It's a difficult dilemma. We'll let you have a chance to respond, Denise, in a moment. And we also want to talk about prevention. Should these mothers be punished? How do we stop this from happening? Thousands of pregnant women from drinking and harming their unborn children. We'll hear from our panel on that, and tell us what you think about this issue. Follow the contact links on albertaprimetime.com, and we're back in 60 seconds.
You can't stop what happens at home, but maybe you can stop something like that in the public. I'm not sure how much of an impact the government can actually have on that, since it's very much personal decision.
It's such a big problem, maybe they just stop selling it.
Unless you get down to educating people at the very base level, it's not going to help just hearing it, because some of those people never even see the the assistance that's out there.
Short of taking away their ability to have babies, I don't know what you can do.
Some thoughts there from Albertans on how to stop more pregnant women from hard drinking at all, and reduce new fetal alcohol spectrum disorder cases. Chris, could Alberta consider legislation? You're not allowed to abuse a child out of the womb. What about in it?
I think that's going a little bit too far with regard to people's rights. I think the key to it has to be some form of public education to make people aware of the problems that arise if they drink when they're pregnant. That create these children with FASD.
Egon, prevention, is the province spending enough there?
I wouldn't think so. Let me say again that this is a really serious disease. That is, it's irreparable brain trauma that the baby has to live with until she dies from age. And prevention is, of course, the most important thing to do. We know that 98% of women in Canada have knowledge about the risk of drinking during pregnancy. However, more than 60% believe it is okay to drink anyway, but as long as I don't binge drinking.
Bruce, before we get to Denise, your quick thoughts on spending on prevention?
Well, I think that's one aspect to provide, to address, but I think we've spent more, if you want, on advertising and promotion, if you want, on that level and awareness than we have actually spent sufficiently. There are good models of actually working on the streets with people in jeopardy, people who are marginalized, et cetera, who had higher risk. A woman who's already given birth to one child is at very high risk to giving birth to another, actually. And so those initiatives, which I still think are small in scale but quite successful, could be expanded. I'd like to see more actually put into prevention of what we call secondary disabilities, which
people
helps
with FASD.
People with FASD. I'm an adoptive parent. My son has a fairly successful life. He's rescued from child welfare, essentially, and is doing quite well in the community today. And if we can prevent people from ending up on the streets, being in difficulty with the criminal justice system, et cetera, then in fact, not only do we reduce costs, but we increase the potential for people to be able to contribute to society.
Let's ask our government spokesperson. You go into meetings probably pounding your fist on the table for money. There's lots of hands out. The government's being asked to cut spending, and then pair that with what you've discovered about what works and what doesn't with women.
And clearly this, as Egon has said and Bruce have said, this is a very complex issue. And as a result, cross-ministry is working as hard to try and focus on all the key points. For example, Alberta has 22 parent-child assistance programs that deal with high-risk moms, risk at having a baby with FASD or have FASD themselves, which we've partnered with First Nations and Inuit Health. I mean, there's a number of initiatives going on. There's lots of initiatives through the cross-ministry dealing with the justice aspect in terms of supporting, mentoring young offenders leaving Edmonton Young Offender Centre that have FASD to ensure they have a successful transition back into community. There's an excellent, what we call a WRAP program for kids in school in 17 school sites that have FASD that need those extra support systems wrapped around them. And so, I mean, we will continue to do that. There's not, I mean, money gets limited. We work with what we have. You're right, there's competing other priorities in government. And yeah, it can be challenging for cross-ministry, for government, because this is a huge issue. And as Bruce says, the adult side, we're kind of catching up now.
Right. Is it, Egon, because it's maybe not, you know, you don't have taxpayers and voters phoning, writing letters, demanding action? It's an ugly issue that gets swept under the carpet.
Yeah, it is, and they don't have a voice to speak for themselves. And most of the root causes seems to be in the social determinants for health. In poverty, living in domestic violence, and other not very good circumstances that women drink just to cope with a terrible situation. But this is not only the explanation, but a lot seems to be there. Other explanations are, in fact, that some women are ignorant about the risks of drinking. And there are cultural, also not in Alberta, but in other countries, for example, in Italy, people believe that it is good for the unborn baby to have some alcohol.
Chris, do you see progress at all, enough progress maybe, any being made from your angle in the justice system trying to reach out to FASD youth?
There is some attempts. What's happening here in Calgary is that the courts are aware of the problem. They try to accommodate a young person with FASD as best they can within the system, but the system's not really designed to deal with them. I think what's got to happen is that we need to have in place some sort of supportive living arrangement where a young person with FASD can be placed somewhere where they get the daily supports they need to help them be more successful in their lives. That's got to involve the social or child and family services and those sort of agencies to make those sort of placements available to them. There's very, very few of those sort of placements available right now. Quite often I will deal with a young person who, with FASD, who gets released on a probation order or sentenced on a probation order, and then that young person, in effect, goes to the Child and Family Services and gets put into a shelter. It's just not an appropriate placement for them.
Final words from you, Bruce. We haven't heard from you for a bit.
I think that at least sums up one. Obviously, there are many major complex issues here, but we have Child and Youth Services has responsibility up to age 18 and has very good initiatives. And then we don't have, as this province, a comparable legislative framework past age 18. You can't actually pinpoint a specific point of responsibility to ensure supports for people in adulthood, as we can with children and in education. And that's one of the elements that's missing as a province. So it seems odd to me we've been so successful at doing this at the child level in terms of legislation initiatives that we haven't been able to cross the age barrier. And that's the longest part of people's lives, and in fact becomes in fact the most promising or the most detrimental.
Yeah.
That's right.
A difficult issue, and we appreciate all of your comments and expertise tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Denise Milne is Senior Manager of FASD Initiatives and Children's Mental Health from Alberta Child and Youth Services. Good to hear so many commendations tonight for your department. Egon Janssen, Executive Director and CEO of the Institute of Health Economics, and Bruce Uditsky, CEO of the Alberta Association for Community Living, along with Christopher McAvini, a lawyer at the Youth Criminal Defence Office in Calgary. Thank you all.